right, welcome to the Automation Insider. I'm your host, Joe McGrath, and today we want to talk about data readiness. This is a topic that really helps you pave the way for your automation success. I have a really awesome guest today, Ryan Chesterfield. Ryan, go ahead and introduce yourself.
My name's Ryan Chesterfield. I'm founder at Auto FC. We are a full suite automation consulting firm helping users of automation understand what solutions are going to bring them benefit, say, most effectively or the quickest. We also service startup robotic companies looking to enter the market and also venture capital firms looking to invest in robotic technology.
Yeah, awesome. All right, so having your data ready, right? Like what does that mean? And let's dive into this topic a little bit, because we talk about data in maybe every step of the design, implementation, and operation of a node in a supply chain, right? Data is a big thing. And we want to talk about a specific piece, I think, today, right? And that's like the back end data. So how do you connect your data sources, your tables, your systems, to what may be your future automation suite of tools, right?
Yeah, data readiness. I think data readiness is really the first step if you're looking into automation. You've got to have your zeros and ones straight, or at least an understanding of what zeros and ones you have available before you're able to implement this technology. And if you don't have this, the analogy I like to use is putting gravel in a wood chipper. So I think I think there's a stat out there that I've seen a range of numbers, but it's somewhere in 80+% of warehouses are using manual processes, which means they're issuing to work to the floor in a manual fashion. So having an understanding of what your current system is able to do, what data you have available, and also how good is that data. A lot of customers, or almost every customer that I've gone to in the past in implementing this technology, they all have data, but understanding how up to date is that data. You've got an item master of all the list of the products that you have in your facility, and if you don't have the dimensions listed in that item master, or maybe these dimensions change over time, things like this can really impact the automation downstream, and maybe we'll get into that. But I think really that's the first step, is as having a firm hold on your abilities as a user to provide this data to a system or even to your own team, and how are you using this? Pointing back to that 80%, that means there's a lot of ground to be covered in the warehouses of today, and I think that
I think it's a good segue, and I think you touched on one of the very first things is data hygiene, or like, is your data clean, and is it ready to be used in the way that we may use data to support an automated function, right? So talk about some of the big data hygiene things that you kind of end up having to work through, combat, help figure out with customers regularly.
Yeah, what comes to mind is a case study with Target in I think it was around 2013, let's call it some of the mid 2000s, where they wanted to enter the Canadian market. And they had invested a large amount of money, billions of dollars, in acquiring real estate and distribution space. And in doing this, they had to shift all of their US systems over to Canada. And problems came about when implementing the technology. One, in unit conversions, and two, they had to populate all of their ERP systems with things like dimensional data and so on and so forth to enable these systems. And they found that there were errors in their data, and this could be a decimal point that was misplaced, maybe an extra zero, or even a digit that was misrepresented. And in a manual environment, these problems can be dealt with by humans on the floor, where somebody can identify an anomaly. But robotic systems don't have this ability to identify these anomalies. And this can create situations where, like replenishment, for example, where if you've got a misplaced decimal point, we may be getting 3 pallets instead of 3 cases, or we may be getting 30 totes from a system instead of the 3 totes that we're looking for. And this can create huge problems downstream. If you can imagine, an operator now has to remedy this situation. And you can imagine what having to deal with 30 totes versus 3 units or 3 totes could do
Yeah,
to an
absolutely.
operator.
It would drive you nuts as an ops manager, right? Just constantly having the wrong stuff show up. So I mean, obviously having a clean item master, it's tough. None of them are perfectly clean. But I think a lot of folks are taking the time, especially nowadays, to like maybe send a team around to measure stuff or get a Cubiscan, or even in some operations where you already have like a scan tunnel, just running it through and doing size validations on maybe your inbound cases. Though I think the more effort you put into it, the cleaner output you get, and like the much more I don't know, stable in process you're going to be left with.
Absolutely. And it's a great point that there's technology available today that wasn't available 5 or 10 years ago, or maybe not ubiquitous 5 or 10 years ago, that can enable these systems. And Cubiscan is a good one, is a good example. There's, drone technology now for inventory management, or there's actually a couple technologies out there for inventory management. These companies are seeing a lot of success in just straightening out companies' inventory, because if you don't know what you don't know, you have to remedy that problem on the floor, and robots are not good at doing that. They need consistent food, and so yeah, I think that's a
Yeah,
great
absolutely.
point.
So there's a couple other pieces of data that I think you want to make sure that you have access to, and this will lead us into the next series of questions I got for you. But I think there's like order data that you got to have good handle on. If all your orders are in emails, like that's probably not a great candidacy for automating your operation. That'd be rough. And then you're gonna have to have information about your building, right? This is all kind of basic design stuff that I always ask for. And then you get an inventory snapshot. You kind of mentioned that there's some newer technologies that are helping kind of streamline that inventory management, accuracy, and even just snapshot data, which is really good. But all of this, I think, speaks to like, do you have the backup systems or the systems in place to even like store, manipulate, house, and then distribute data, right? So these are kind of the existing stuff. Like, I know we kind of pre-gamed a little bit, and you were mentioning like a lot of folks may or may not have a WMS, and if they don't, oftentimes they're utilizing an ERP in a WMS way. You want to speak on that?
Yeah, I think well, one thing that's happening in the industry is the line is blurring between, you've got, if you went from kind of left to right, you've got ERP, WMS, and WES. And it's getting confusing because if they were a Venn diagram, the overlap is just continuing to increase. So you've got ERP systems that say we have a WMS module, we have WMSs that say we'll optimize work for robots, and then you've got WESs that will say, oh, we'll do
And
WMS
we'll hold your
functions. So
inventory. Yeah.
really, right. And if you kind of, define a WMS as the system of record, having an understanding of what that system will do and how it's able to deliver work to the floor is really important. And an example that I can think of a customer that I had was they had a couple $1 million automated system that involved a sortation and a label print and apply. And one thing we see a lot is IT gets involved at the last minute, and they're basically the folks that are in charge of this data or getting this data to the appropriate system. So one, always involve your IT folks as soon as you can, because it's very important. They really don't like being surprised, and often they have long lead times of the projects they already have on their plate. So this can sometimes be the long pole in the tent. And if this isn't considered correctly, I'll kind of come back to my example here. This customer, I mentioned they had a label print and apply system. So we would scan a license plate on the box. We would go look up in the WMS, what order is this for? We would generate a label, and we would tamp it onto the box. And the system was designed to handle, let's say 30 cartons a minute. And when we went to implement the system, the manner in which the data flow was architected by the internal IT teams had to go through a server in Seattle, and then through some other third party in Michigan, and then would come back to us. And we found that this took time, based on what their system, the bandwidth of the actual facility, how they were batching the work from their system. And this caused a delay. We actually had to make changes to the conveyor system to hold back boxes because we had to scan and wait anywhere from 5 to 10 seconds to get the label that we needed to tamp it. So we took this couple $1 million system that was equipped to do 30 cartons a minute, and it was only able to do 12 to 15 cartons a minute, leaving one label print and apply machine totally unutilized.
Yeah, it's funny. Like this is the kind of example that crops up all the time, and you'd think, oh, it's just conveyor, but like we're dealing with stuff in the millisecond time range, right? We have calculated all the buffers that we need to have, and if somebody doesn't contact IT and they have a system that's meant to return a label in 5 seconds, hey, that sounds pretty good until you combine that with a super high capacity system, and suddenly like it's 5 seconds is not acceptable. Did anybody tell IT? I don't know, right? But and then everybody's like, it's the Spider-Man meme after that, right? Everybody's pointing at everybody else, like, how did this happen? And I've seen this, I don't know, no less than 5 times, professionally. It's a real thing.
Yeah, and it can be tough to tackle, right? I mean, IT, often these response time, you talk about the milliseconds, they're outlined in the vendor contract. So the vendor has an understanding of like what response time they're going to utilize. It's often published. And maybe it could be overlooked, but even if the IT team understands it, unless they've actually gone through and taken time to test it, which can be tough, right? We mentioned the projects on their plate already. But it's very important because it basically has the outcomes that we just talked about. So unless they have the time to sort of test and go through it, I think that's a critical part. I think you got to be doing that.
I think it's a great point. And so some of these, obviously get IT involved right away. I think that's an excellent key takeaway. In everybody's head, it's like, oh, the IT guy will take care of it. He's pretty smart. And then if you say that enough times, then the IT guy will probably get on LinkedIn, right? So definitely involve your IT friends right away. Now, sometimes like as companies grow, they start with an ERP and they say, hey, listen, I just need to make a little change here. I need to make a little change here. I need to make a little change here. And they end up developing these like internal systems that are very custom, like very, very custom. And like they end up using a lot of resources to maintain those, and integrating with like some extremely customized or maybe an IT infrastructure that isn't necessarily super well understood just because it's been tacked onto so many times can also be a big challenge, right? Have you ever worked with a customer like that?
Absolutely. And I think that creates problems in scalability. I think the scenario you just described is kind of the workaround that the IT teams are forced to implement in the scenario we just talked about with the LPA. We've got vendors that are bending steel or equipment showing up, so they have to get something live. They kind of jimmy rig something together to get the data there. And in order to do it, they've got to move through all these different systems. So starting with the data readiness and an understanding of what your system will do and not do, and really how you're going to scale that. Because the chances are, especially if you've got more than one facility, you're not going to want to implement a custom solution. Like you said, it's not going to be supportable, or certainly not in a robust fashion.
Yeah. And when you're going to scale the next one, like, what do you do? So I think maybe maybe the second big takeaway is like, get good, clean data, know what your data is, but then also make sure that you have systems, in place that can support that and can scale appropriately. And if you need to stick with a very custom system, then get IT involved even earlier. Maybe snag a consultant that could help you map through all these processes and like understand what an automation, like piece of automation, may actually require and what it may not require. And I think there's also like some kind of interesting alternative solutions, and we talked about this a little bit previously, just between us. But there's this behavior of a lot of integrators, like Hy-Tek included, to have a WES. And I think one of the reasons that drives us to really want to have that capability is we can solve a good number of those issues, right? Like you have a system that's sort of disparate or doesn't have the capability to hold inventory or whatever. So like our software might be able to reach up and help you accommodate a whole bunch of those. But from a customer perspective, like what are some of the things that they can do to prepare themselves so they don't have to lean so heavily on an integrator, maybe late in the game to take care of those problems for them?
I think that one, a lot of WMS systems, let's say that you do have one, are very underutilized. These packages are big and very expensive, often very powerful. But the internal know-how of the teams is limited on how to utilize all of these
They're extremely
functions.
complicated systems,
And
right? Like Red Prairie, Manhattan, High Jump. Like there is a lot going on under the hood, right?
a lot going on under the hood, and they can be, I've already mentioned, very, very expensive and or very expensive to change. And that's kind of where you talk about, or you mentioned Hy-Tek and the WES, and pointing back to that Venn diagram where the functionalities are overlapping. So this is what's the good news is for the customers, is that the WESs are now able to do some of this work because the WMS companies can be very expensive to change or edit or maybe add that module that you need. There's now solutions out there like WESs that can do a lot of the WMS functionality that you need, especially specifically for your system. So if you have resources in-house that can change the WMS. Some companies are like this, or maybe you've got a homegrown WMS and you do this in-house. That's great news for you. Think about what solution you're looking to provide and what their WES is going to do. And then you can kind of play the game of like, where do I want to spend my time? Do I want to create a project for my internal teams to manipulate this data, or does it make more sense to shift this to a WES?
Yep. And there's also some good partners out there. Like let's say you have a high jump system or something like that, right? There's also some good partners out there that can help you like make those WMS changes a lot easier. Like there are like entire organizations that are just devoted to WMS upgrades, WMS implementations, changes, like validation studies. Like excellent resources I've found in my past. Like, have you ever you have any experience with those type of organizations? I think you probably do some of that yourself.
Yeah, definitely. And that's great visibility, I think, for the folks listening to this, is there's lots of folks out there that do have this know-how. So don't, necessarily think it just ends with the company that you have. There's expertise out there that can help you understand what changes to be made. And, you don't have to get the big ship with a little rudder to go in there and change your system. There's experts out there that can help you figure this out. And they're just more nimble.
Absolutely. All right. And then let's talk about like what that might mean, like roadmap wise. Like, so in the beginning, you're like, hey, I have an operation. I think I need to automate. We've all figured out all of our finances and stuff. So we know we need to do it. What's the roadmap probably need to look like for that customer or that company?
Yeah, so kind of like pointing back to the data readiness conversation. In my, I spent my career selling automation, and I would go into all kinds of customers. I'll kind of pause and say that these projects usually start with somebody in the C-suite or maybe a VP saying, we got to do something, and we need automation, or maybe like the neighbor next door bought some automation and they're wowed. So understanding, really where your pain points are and how that's impacting your business. Maybe WMS or a WES could implement a batch pick. Maybe automation isn't what you need. So going back to what I was talking about, the customers, I would go into these customers, I would say, we need automation. Boss told me, what do you guys got? And I would go in there and I would take a look around and think, you guys need some carts and some scan guns. You don't need automation, so to speak. And the reality is, if you do a batch pick and you've got scan guns, this is automation. You're sending digital information to the floor versus, say, a system where a WMS prints out a stack of orders to a floor and you've got a human that's sorting this out. Also, this comes with some rigidity. In the scenario where you're printing orders to the floor, or even with the scan guns, you can look at things like skip picks. If you've got users that are doing all sorts of skip picks in their operation, they know that that item's not there when they go to pick it, which is a problem, right? We've got an issue there that could probably be
That may be
remedied.
the issue.
But
Yeah.
but it can be an indicator that you're not ready for automation, because a robotic system isn't going to deal with that skip pick scenario. That kind of can lead to that 30 totes versus 3 totes scenario that we talked about earlier. So I think building the roadmap looks like making sure you're able to get this data to the floor, and also understanding what the automation is going to do to the flexibility of your operation, and coaching the automation vendor into the flexibility you need built into your operation, because that's not something they're going to be inherently able to understand. Like, yes, they're going to go in there and understand their business to the best of their ability. And, there's examples of, most of these providers are going to take a data pool to like take a digital footprint of your business. And if you've got a sale, let's say, that you only did that year, that's diluting the data or creating this giant spike for this one SKU, have an awareness that you need to give them a digital footprint that's representative of the business for the automation to be able to, consume that effectively.
Okay. So kind of like, first things first, like, understand what systems you got in your processes. Try to digitize as much of that as you can. So maybe the first step in automation, or maybe the second step in automation, is go ahead and RF pick. If you're paper picking, don't try to jump right into a full-on robotic ASRS. Like, that might be a little too much, right? Automation will solve a lot of problems. They won't solve all your problems, I think. And then maybe the second note is, like, as you're designing additional automation, note, like, and you've started to understand all this, note where you need to be flexible. A lot of times automation, I think this might be the point you're trying to make, automation may reduce flexibility. And sometimes that is excellent for an operation. It forces you into the right processes. Sometimes it's constraining. It doesn't let you grow the way you wanted to grow, or doesn't let you approach some of the process improvements that you wanted to approach previously, right? So understanding where you need to be flexible. Sometimes designers might see building a bunch of flexibility and is sub-optimizing a process, right? I can make one thing go real fast. It's hard to make two things, balance, right?
Yeah, and I think like, to that point, edge cases are also very important. Like, this is where I saw lots of hindsight's 2020 in the system. We'd go put a system in, and then there'd be, oh yeah, like, every once in a while we have this system, or we need to do this function, and that can be very difficult for automation to do, or maybe even impossible for the automation to do. So having a firm hold of the edge cases, kind of pointing back to, making sure that digital footprint that you have is representative of your business. Also, what edge cases do you encounter as a business throughout the year, and making sure that your team, the vendor included, are essentially equipped to manage that.
Yeah. Do you know what your peak to average ratio is? Do you know when your peaks are? Do you know why they are? Yeah, like these are kind of, they seem like basic questions, like, once you're at the point of developing a pretty large system. But if you're starting from paper, like, these are things you may have to do some research and some discovery on.
No doubt.
Ryan, like, any kind of last, like, big summarized, synthesized takeaways for folks that are thinking about getting in to automation, but they're not really sure if their data is there or not?
Yeah, I think I mentioned that these projects often start with somebody in the C-suite, making the light bulb goes off that we got to do something. So analyzing your internal team, what skill sets do I have? Do I have IT people that can manage the WMS or edit the WMS? Do I have operations managers that have experience with automation? And equip yourself with expertise, whether that be a consultant, or whether that be partnering with an integrator that you trust and you feel like understands your business and has delivered solutions in your vertical before. The expertise is going to be critical. Because these systems are new, right? You've got these highly complex automated systems. I think it's probably a shallow assumption to think that your team that manages a warehouse is going to be able to effectively understand, implement, and then operate these systems. I mean, when you get a new automated system, it can be like learning to play the guitar. Like you can tell the vendor, I need the guitar, and they can build you this great guitar, but now you got to understand how to play it. And if you're going from paper to scan guns, or maybe even a bigger jump is scan guns to scan and conveyor, realize that the function your operators are going to be doing is going to be very different, and one involving them up front, where the pain points are, the boots on the ground, and hey, if you had this, would this help you? Or what do you think about this? I think this is where those edge cases kind of creep up, because these are the folks that are, like I said, boots on the ground, actually understand this the best, and sometimes can provide the best information.
It's always like humbling when a forklift driver has some insight. You're like, yeah, I did not think about that at all, right? And it happens every day, right? Like you just have to be receptive to it. I think that's really cool. And yeah, again, like there are tons of resources. I actually spend a good deal of time on the podcast, like talking to what are essentially resources for operations teams to get out there. Like a lot of labor is specialized, and the more we dive into automation, the more specialized that labor really gets. And it would be kind of silly for a lot of companies to have an engineer on staff that only does concepts for automation and researches automation markets, right? Like why would that be a position? So reaching out for help from folks that are specialized probably save you a lot of money. Probably save you a lot of time and heartache as well. I definitely see that as a huge note.
Yeah, and time and heartache equals dollars.
It in fact does. Yeah. Awesome. Well, Ryan, thank you very much for taking the time to talk with me today. I think it was a really interesting conversation, a really cool angle on data that we haven't talked about before in the show. So appreciate it. For those tuning in, thank you very much for watching our session. And be sure to check out the Automation Insider anywhere you watch your podcasts, and definitely check us out on Spotify. All right. Thank you very much.